And thank you for joining us today. I know this is such a big period of uncertainty and upheaval for a lot of us. I can see just from those who've introduced themselves in the chat that we have quite a few people who are joining us from academic institutions, and every day there seems to be something new with how our funding will be affected, or the words that we can use in communicating what we do and what we value. And I know for me, it's been a great source of tension in trying to navigate this uncertainty and upheaval. And so I don't know about the rest of you, but I've been thinking a lot about how we move forward during this time when there is so much uncertainty that we have to navigate. And I have been thinking a lot about liminal space and the kind of waiting time or the waiting space, and being present in that as, this is the moment that we are in, and we cannot predict what will happen next. We can't predict what will happen with our jobs or our teams or our families right now. And so kind of settling into this present moment and thinking about, who am I in this moment, and what do I trust, and what do I want to do with this moment, which is the only one of these moments that I will have. And so I thank you all for joining us today and being here with us in this moment, and choosing to spend your time and investing your energy and showing your commitment to this community, and to the practices that we're also passionate about, and to just the people here that we've made these connections with. That there's probably many demands on your attention right now. So thank you for choosing to spend your moment here today with us, and with our guest speaker today, Dr. Colleen Cuddy. So as before we launch into Dr. Cuddy's presentation, before I introduce her, I know that we had asked people, if you're new here or if you just want to say hello, please do so in the chat. Introduce yourself, let us know where you're joining us from. And I was thinking today about how effective mindfulness meditation has been for me in the past, during these kind of tumultuous times, where I'm often distracted into thinking about what might happen in the future that I can't control. And I haven't been using it enough lately. And so that's something that I would like to get back to try to center myself more. And I'm wondering if anyone has any other strategies that they employ, that you've used during COVID or during some other periods like this, where it's hard to settle and be in the moment. How do you ground yourself? What's your practice that works for you? So if anyone's willing to share that in the chat, maybe some of us can learn from each other and try to help each other stay grounded. Yoga, lots and lots of yoga. Yes, yoga is so good for that. Always leaving a yoga practice, you just feel so much more centered and in the moment. Yeah. Also find the same kind of meditation from gardening. Oh, snowshoeing, Jeremy. Yes, it is so meditative, and so just brings you into connection with nature, which is always helpful. Swimming back and forth and back and forth. Yep. Yeah. That repetitive physical activity. Yeah. A morning routine, the same guided meditation every morning for the most part for the past 2 years before having coffee number 1. Wow, that must be really impactful for you to commit to doing the same one every morning. Good. More physical activity, martial arts, yoga, walks outside, lunches with friends for extroverts. Really grounding. It's really nice to have those connections. Yes, definitely. Well, thanks everyone. And I think maybe Got another noise canceling headphones and a favorite calming song. Yes, maybe especially important for those of us that have a lot of activity around us during when we're at home or at work. I know in my household we have a period at night that we just call the screaming and running in circles time. And it's not so much the adults, but I can see how the noise canceling headphones would be just really nice during those times. Meditation and just remembering joy, laughter, sparkle. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for sharing those. And so I'm gonna move us from this kind of inner reflection, and we'll move on to our guest today. So, and this is going to be the latest installment of our series for 2024-2025, intentional integration. How do we know if it's working? So we've tried pulling experts to share their perspectives from lots of different areas, lots of different facets of applying interventions and strategies for intentionally integrating across boundaries. And so today we'd like to welcome Dr. Colleen Cuddy. And Dr. Cuddy is an academic and researcher specializing in organizational development and team science. She holds a PhD in organizational development and change, and her dissertation focused on the process of integration in interdisciplinary STEM research teams, as well as a master's degree in library and information science and English literature. So Dr. Cuddy is based at Stanford University's School of Medicine, and she strives to understand and improve the dynamics of team interactions and organizational structures within academic and clinical research settings by advancing and applying team science. Her work integrates a variety of methodologies to study team processes with a focus on practical applications that enhance team effectiveness and foster organizational innovation. Dr. Cuddy is certified in team coaching for high-value results. So thank you very much to Dr. Colleen Cuddy for joining us today. And we're especially grateful because we've had some schedule changes. And so Dr. Cuddy agreed to move her time from March to February. So we could accommodate some of these changing schedules, and we very much appreciate that. So without further ado, Dr. Cuddy, please take it away.
Great. I'm just going to share my screen as we do. And let me see. Perfect. I have a thumbs up if you see my screen from anyone there. Perfect. Okay, great. And I'm just going to minimize so I don't have to look at myself when I'm talking to you, because I find that very distracting. Thank you, Amelia, for the introduction. I'm really excited to be talking to you today about integration. The theme of this year's integration seminars, intentional integration, how do we know if it's working, really resonates with me. I was able to attend some of the previous sessions, and I learned a lot. There's some very sophisticated research in team science that made me think about my own work in examining integration. And I guess importantly, really starting to think about like that, how do we know if it's working? Because I think that's the piece that I personally am not always connecting, and I think as a role we all need to be doing better on that, getting that into practice. Today I'm going to be drawing on some of the work that I've done and what I know about integration and how I'm approaching that. I spent the better part of 2022 and 2023 thinking about integration. My PhD dissertation looks at how integration is enacted in an interdisciplinary academics research STEM team with the extra M for medicine. And my talk today is entitled Integration in Action, Enhancing Team Science Through Collaborative Practices. So in the next, I guess, maybe half hour, 35 minutes or so, I thought I'd discuss what integration is, really thinking and viewing it as a process, why it's important to construct for team science, and then kind of start to get into what we might do to achieve better integration in team science. So I think this slide and what's contained on this slide is probably very familiar territory for this audience. But I thought I'd quickly run through some of the challenges of doing interdisciplinary research that present in team science. this idea of disciplinary preferences for language, methodologies, ways of communicating that lead to barriers, the different roles and status of team members, if we're bringing different people together, and how those role shifts and new configurations and status changes. Leadership and team dynamics often comes into play, again, for very similar reasons to the roles and status. There's cultural, institutional differences that are experienced and have to be navigated. And something I'm kind of thinking about quite a bit now and doing some research on is just actually the nature of the research awards themselves, and thinking about how those the establishment of those and the way they're enacted can set up teams for success. I think these are all really common when we bring scientists and others from different disciplines together. And I think when we think about team science too, I think we or at least as academics, we often go right into thinking only about the scientists on the team, and their teams consist of others on the team that are contributing to the research, but may not be the MDs or PhDs, but are important parts of the research and supporting that research that we need to think about. So a little background on my perspective and how I come to look at those challenges. As Amelia said, my PhD is in organizational development change, and I study interdisciplinary teams really through that lens and work with teams applying what I've learned from an organizational development perspective. So today I'm going to draw mainly on my own research and observations on studying integration teams. I come at team science through that science of teams via a social science approach and management research. And I really see team science as addressing two converging elements, hence the slide here with these arrows. I'm sure there's probably a lot more arrows, and you're probably thinking I could add 2 or 3 more, but I think keeping it simple and really seeing team science as this kind of intersection of being an effective team and managing the team research. And today I'm going to be really focused on what it looks like to be an effective team, less talking about the management of the research. I think that's incredibly important, and project managers out there have a big role there. So when I think about what it means to be an effective team, I draw on Hackman's basic principles as my guide, that the team successfully delivers results to various stakeholders, that the team adapts and learns through effective teamwork, and individual team members are satisfied and learn. And I know there's many other ways to measure effectiveness, such as looking at metrics. I have a background in library information science, so it's very natural to kind of want to focus on outputs and to quantify outputs, especially research output. And I think bibliometrics is certainly one way to think about team effectiveness, and something that we shouldn't forget about. You know, how many publications and patents, whether the research influences policy or patient care, that kind of long tail of research down the road. Measuring that is incredibly important. But coming back to this idea that output alone and those measurements in particular aren't the only measures of success. So as I do my own research and in this talk today, when I'm talking about team effectiveness, I'm really referring to it as a method of measuring team success by identifying factors such as processes that facilitate or inhibit a team's performance. And I think that word process is very important. This is kind of a rendering of that kind of classic IPO, input, process, or mediator output framework from a graph. I've always been most interested in processes that facilitate effectiveness. And so if you think about a research team, there are various inputs such as team composition, the organizational context, the task design, environment, funding, all resources that are being input to this, to create like this kind of perfect team, if you will, or what people hope will be a perfect team. Then there's really the processes that the team enacts, such as communication, collaboration, and then there's outputs from those processes, which could be team performance and success, goal achievement, team learning, individual learning, kind of back to those Hackman principles. So when I think about integration, I do feel it's probably one of the most important processes for teams, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Integration, I love the slide of this soup and this I do have to stop using it at some point, but it really was this guy, this image and idea came from one of someone I was interviewing that said that their team is a soup. It's not a puree. When I asked them about to describe what integration looked like, they had this idea of a soup but it's not a mushy, a pureed soup. It's a soup that's kind of chunky and you can kind of see what is contributed to this, we got these ingredients and we've got this new outcome, but you can still see all the pieces that were there that made it what it is. And I think that's really the definition I like to use when I'm talking to people or research interviewing people is providing them with the integration. I always go back to this REPCO definition of it's a process in which ideas, data, information, methods, tools, concepts, and theories are synthesized, connected, or blended. This idea also that integration is a blending of diverse inputs that differs from and is more than simply a sum of the parts. And I think that soup metaphor really plays well to that. We really are trying to take all these pieces and create something different. I think it was during Interreach, and someone can probably can let me know later when we get to the questions, was speaking about having evaluation and team science not be just the kind of sprinkles on top of the cupcakes. I really like that imagery too. Like everything needs to be baked in the batter of the cupcake. So I guess there's something about food imagery that really appeals to me. Within integration itself, it's a kind of an umbrella term. There are many different types of integration and more than are on this slide, but these are the ones that I focused on in my research, and just going to roll through them now because it's going to be important to think about these as I talk later. Social integration is this idea of coming together based on acceptance of group members, identification within the team. So that's a very foundational type of integration, and you'll see it in teams and groups throughout your life. Knowledge integration is this idea of merging two or more unrelated knowledge structures into a single structure. We also have cognitive integration, which is this idea of sharing crucial information while knowing where unique knowledge resides within the team. This kind of transactional memory type of integration. And then finally, conceptual integration, understanding the relationship between concepts to arrive at a new interpretation. Kind of this is something new. Getting there, I think, is the process of integration is really complex and it's gradual and it unfolds over time. And you can have multiple types of integration and they can build upon each other, and they're all very important to having an effective team. But when I'm thinking about team science, I feel like conceptual integration is kind of like that holy grail of team science to arrive at that new interpretation. It's really what people are often striving for. So, stepping back, then there's all these processes, why is integration so critical for team science? And quite frankly, I think it is where the magic happens. You can collaborate, all you want. The definition of collaboration and generally is to work jointly with others or together, especially in an intellectual endeavor. And that's great. Like, we want collaboration, but you can collaborate until the cows come home. And in order to be truly successful in team science, there needs to be this higher level of integration to reach your goals. I think in some ways integration is collaboration with intention in a very base way of thinking about it. So I think that's where I kind of just keep coming back to focusing on integration. And we have this whole year, this Interreach year thinking about integration too, which is so great. So I'm going to step back and dive into my own research, because what researcher doesn't like to do that? I'll keep it brief, but on the salient points. So I did a qualitative research study, really looking to answer the question of how integration is enacted in an academic interdisciplinary STEM team. I interviewed team members over a 3-month period and used a critical incident technique to generate examples of when the team successfully and unsuccessfully integrate. So critical incident technique is a procedure for obtaining qualitative information about significant incidents from observers with firsthand experience by asking people basically to tell the story of what happened. It was introduced into the study of teams back in groups back in the 1950s by Flanagan. And it's really this idea of a procedures for identifying actions that can contribute to the success or failure of teams in very specific situations. And I landed on this instead of doing more open-ended interviews because I really wanted to kind of focus and get a sense of, what really happened in those incidents where integration was able to emerge. So I asked participants to recall incidents that directly related to integration on the team, again, providing them with that rep definition. Some of the questions that I asked to kind of get them to really think about incidents were, thinking about a time in a particular time in the past year when a team effectively integrated, describe what happened, what was the team working on at the time, when exactly did the incident take place on a timeline? Was there a particular situation, event, or circumstance leading up to that critical incident? And then more importantly, then what did the team do? What action did the team take that made this resonate as effective? And what was the outcome of the incident? So I generated quite a few of those. And then after the data gathering of the critical incident technique, I held a group reflection session after completing the interviews and a first round transcript coding. And that was kind of a hybrid session to better understand how integration was enacted and what it looked like in the team. It was good. I liked it. It had elements of a focus group to kind of really gain a range about this particular issue. And also had elements of a kind of a reflective practice for the team itself. So the team was able to reflect together and work together, reinforce some of the team identity, I think. And it was only the planned time to observe the team working together. And we elaborated on that lovely soup metaphor during the reflection. They're big soup people. So I coded transcripts. There were 65 unique critical incidents, 47 of which were effective and 18 were ineffective. So that's about 72% of the cases were effective. I then coded for planned or unplanned. Planned integration incidents were incidents constructed to facilitate integration. For example, an icebreaker activity that happened only during every lab meeting, a biannual retreat with the team to work on values. I also coded for the integration type, which I kind of ran through before, those 4 different cognitive, knowledge, social, and conceptual. And then I also then grouped the incidents into settings that emerged from the incident case reports. The settings that I utilized were this lab meeting, so a weekly lab meeting. Lots of things happened in that meeting. Things that actually happened more organically as the team was working in the lab, the annual retreat, and informal meetings outside of the lab. And then here I'm using the term email. This is kind of like email or other asynchronous modes of communicating. So findings, quickly trying to make sense then of integration. Like 44 first order concepts emerged, which I then grouped into 6 second level concepts of proximity and connectedness, intentional behaviors and planned integration, and knowing the expert scientist and the person. Ultimately, this led to 3 top level drivers of effective integration: being together, being intentional, and knowing each other. And maybe you're sitting there saying like, this is super basic. And sometimes I think it is. And my thesis advisor said, sometimes simple is best. Like, let's just run with it. It is simple, but it works. And I think it really does describe what I was seeing in that team quite well. And what I've seen since then. This idea of being intentional is extremely important. There's this idea, first of all, of proximity, of being in the same time and space. There is actually a proximity principle, as you're working closely with someone, you get to know them better and you build relationships, and potentially this could lead to better integration. It's It was this idea of like proximity was really particularly useful in the lab when the team was working on it. Had kind of unfolded when the team was working on when they're sitting together or getting people together in a small lab. The intimacy of sharing the experience really helped propel integration. There were really good outcomes when they kind of saw and did things together that I think that people did say would be really difficult to be replicated in a more virtual experience. There's also this idea of connectedness, um, which is really a little different than you can be connected but not be in the same proximity as someone. People form connections through the work and the response, thinking about the responsibility, I think often to the patients, being available and being responsive and sharing common goals. This was like, this one team member put it, this ability to bounce ideas out off of each other, feeling a connectedness of empathy was mentioned a lot, walking in people's shoes, being together. Integration really happens best in the moment, and in person. I think I mentioned that. And a lack of proximity and connectedness showed up when the team was less effective. Being intentional, again, and we talked about this quite a bit in the series, but I think it was really a strong theme that emerged in the interviews. And I saw it as splitting into these two elements of intentional behaviors and planned integration. So team members adopted and acted in similar intentional ways that promoted integration, and leadership on the team was particularly effective at creating and drawing on planned integration activities to build a strong integrative culture. So some of the behaviors that the team members cited for creating integration was being available, being responsive. Peer pressure was also mentioned as a positive way of holding each other accountable so that they came together and could integrate. Assuming good attentions, working on relationships, seeking feedback. Those intentional behaviors is putting yourself in others' shoes, giving people the benefit of the doubt, and thinking of alternate explanations to interactions. Where all these kind of they practice as they thought about this, as they interacted with each other, and tried to come up with new ideas together. There is this idea of one thing that came up too that I thought was very interesting was, this idea of abundance rather than scarcity. There was lots of data, and there's lots of things that can be done. This kind of bringing that into intentionality, that the PI really enforced that with the team, that there's a lot of data here. There's lots that we can be doing, and that intentionality helped people really work together because they weren't giving up part of their own work and themselves. There's always enough. Planned integration was, I think, just simply, you can probably imagine it as this programming. So they had a buddy program, a biannual retreat, weekly lab meetings. These settings really helped prioritize team values and created a culture of togetherness. The weekly lab meeting in particular was highly successful integrative setting. Both setting and the retreat, they allowed different types of integration, specifically social integration and cognitive and knowledge integration to develop. Lastly, knowing each other. Knowing each other as people was really much more important for the teams I studied than knowing each other as expert scientists for facilitating integration in all integration types and settings. The team really prioritized knowing members as people and used social integration to facilitate project integration, enabling people to connect more easily with each other and move the research forward. Knowing each other as people and being seen as a person and a scientist came up more often than any other concept in the data analysis. One team member even said that this lab really has more of a personal connection. So by having that personal connection, they feel more comfortable asking people for help. And when they get in conversations and ask people for help and learn from each other, they start to do things together and achieve a level of integration. And she said, I've been in different labs and I just don't have that same level of knowing who people are, and it's really hard for me to find partners to work with in meaningful ways. So I think it's quite important. So the findings found that effective integration is built on knowing each other as people, not just scientists, enacted through relationships and knowledge sharing that are intentional. And it really happens when the team comes together, whether that's physically or virtually. Social integration was the foundation for all other integration type, not all, but many other integration types, particularly conceptual and cognitive. The team's social integration practices underpin most incidents of effective integration. And when social integration was lacking, it gave us rise to effective integration. Social processes were frequently building blocks for different types of integration and helped the team establish common ground, group identity, and trust. I think what I didn't find was interesting was the disciplinary barriers to integration being so huge as I expected on this team. There wasn't a lot of disciplinary chauvinism or closed-mindedness. This was really initially surprising to me. There's an open-mindedness to new ideas and understanding of the expertise and the values that teams brought. But then it did make sense, really, because they had these intentional ways of working together. And I think, let's see, I did want to say, like, let's see, let me go back. One thing another thing that I thought was interesting that I found was, as I talked a little bit about settings and bringing people together, the lab had moved from where they were in their own space. And I think we just have to be really careful when we build spaces and come back and think about the implications of how it's affecting integration. The lab had its own space and then moved into a big open lab space that they shared with other labs. And one of the things that thing that they used to do is listen to music together, and people would choose different types of music and they would listen and have conversations and get to know each other. And when they moved into this new lab space, they all donned headphones and listened to their own music, but also were kind of less approachable. They weren't hearing what was going on around them, and there was a little bit of that. So that was something that, just like kind of simple thing that came up that could be addressed. So the findings did kind of align with some existing models that are out there, the depth-breadth synthesis model by Klein and integration capacity theory by Salazar. You can look those up and read all about them. But coming into then creating integration opportunities, and I think ways that we can do this, obviously, first and foremost, is to be intentional, to set aside regular times for ongoing team building activities, establishing accountability norms, balance the intentionality of working on the relationships as well as the intentionality of working on the science. I think we need that foundational effort of putting effort into coming together, understanding the people on the team and their life pathways, where they're coming from, where they are in their career. Utilize space, as I just said. That's quite important. Like taking a look at the space and making sure it's set up for easy conversations and people to come together. Let's see. This idea too of continuing building connections between people and the science. This idea of integration conductors kind of came up in the research too, where there are certain people on the teams that acted in this role, whether that was the project manager for the team, leadership to some degree, and others in different positions. It doesn't always have to be the leader or senior person, but people that can really make integration happen. And I kind of just called them integration conductors for the lack of a better word at the time, but I've grown to quite like it. Implement and maintain you should be able to implement and maintain processes that improve integration, really invest in social integration. And lastly, I would kind of say, consider team coaching when it's needed. Some of like where I'm at now after this research is focusing a bit about thinking about integration much more holistically as I'm out in the real world working with teams. Integration doesn't really exist in isolation. And while it's interesting to isolate it as a construct or process for research, in practice, it relies on other processes such as communication, leadership, psychological safety. Those are all antecedents, I think, for integration and need, they need to be strong as well. So there are many inputs that can assist with integration. I have been thinking a lot about the structures around the organizational system. And as I mentioned earlier, the research award mechanism, I think that as we're seeing different funders having different types of awards, and it and I guess I'm thinking of it too in our current spaces. We were just talking at the beginning too of changes that are happening in our with government funded research, how that can really influence integration from happening if funding is withheld or there aren't built-in times for teams to get to know each other, or if we're focusing too much on just the science piece. Inputs, let's see, sorry, just multi-team systems and team of teams. I think, many integrative benefits that I saw with the team that I was studying was based in the States, but they had larger teams overseas, and that connectedness was a little weaker. So how do we kind of, radiate out to non-core team members? That's a useful thing to think about. How do we enable integration across semi-permanent boundaries, and how do we develop intentionally at scale multi-team systems? I think those are all things to think about, as well as timing of integration within a project. There seem to be like ebbs and flows, and maybe sometimes it's okay to pull off and not force the integration because other processes have to build. So quick, let's see, team assembly is something, I think that the teams really drew on. Knowing more about the type of team you're creating is going to help, of course. There's lots of interpersonal skills, but the ones that kind of came up in my research is being most important were these ideas of patience and empathy, shared decision making, the ability to share problems. I think, that willingness to live with shared decision making and shared problem solving is incredibly important if you are on a team in team science. When I was interviewing the team manager, she told me that a successful integration happens with recruitment and hiring. The lab was well established, and they attracted scientists who were very interested in interdisciplinary work. So that wasn't the problem, but they really wanted to make sure that people would be she said, good people for the team. What they did, and I think what teams have to do is link, those hires to establish values and link them. And they celebrated diversity within their team, thinking that the more diverse the team was, the better it would be. And quickly about those award mechanisms. These are just some of like the things that funding agencies put in place to guide the course of the project. So the mechanism or the structure, the governance structure. I think communications and interagency communications, we're seeing joint agencies working together, and the integration has to happen there as well, or it's not going to translate down to the team. Some of the grants like the NSF teaming grants, building in a year for teams to get to know each other is incredibly important. And integration conductors, like just an aside, it's really difficult to find a stock image of in Creative Commons of a female conductor. And I just found out that only, I think 11% of conductors are female, and women are more likely to lead a G7 nation than a major American orchestra. So that is like another something we need to think about. But here's just a blurred out picture of conductors. And as I'm thinking about integration conductors, I think they can be internal to the team or external to the team. We've got, you've got your leadership, you've got project managers that are embedded within the team trying to make integration happen. And then you can also bring in team coaching, people that are external to the team. And I'm just going to spend just like 2 or 3 minutes on team coaching because it's kind of a journey I'm kind of going through at the moment. And it's something that people, when I've talked about it, are fairly interested in. So I think as we look at team coaching defined in the literature, it's changed over time, and we can see how it's being really thought about as facilitator-led, intervention-led, focusing on problems. And often we do bring in coaches when there's a defined problem within the team, although there's bringing it in right from the get-go is not a bad idea either. This idea of it being these learning interventions, it's really kind of evolved over time to be much more aligned with the idea of coaching individuals, I'd say. And sorry, I was just looking at the chats, making sure that there's nothing crazy that I'm missing in here. Okay, perfect. And I think that we're really seeing this idea of coaching, taking on more elements of coaching individuals, coaching teams, but coaching, like thinking of coaching not so much as a directive approach. So let me just move to my next slide, because I think I try to say it better there. This will be in front of me. So what team coaching is and isn't, I'd say, is it's not this kind of one and done approach. It's not coaching the individuals, getting a group together or a team together and coaching just the leadership, or coaching different individuals within the group on how to be better. It's really coaching the team as an entity, as a whole. They are the client, if you will. And it's not a directive intervention. These are some definitions of team coaching that I particularly like. This one from the International Coaching Federation. It's a partnership in a reflective and co-creative process with a team. Its dynamics and relationships in a way that inspires it to maximize its ability and potential to achieve its common purpose and goals. And this Daniel Meyer quote just is popping up. It pops up all over the internet, and I did drill down it. It actually is from a book that came out in 2005, Team Coaching with the Solution Circle is the name of the book. But it is, a team is not, if we think about teams, is not a problem that needs to be analyzed and solved, but a potential to be unfolded. And I think that's a great guiding principle of if we're supporting teams and trying to see if they're effective, and how do we develop potential, rather than, potentially just constantly analyzing output. Last slide here is just, if we look at, as we coach, team coaching competencies you can draw on many things, but there's different types of modalities that you can use when working with teams, from team building, team facilitation. But I think this kind of shows a little bit of the differences in those, where it's not this kind of directive and coming in and telling someone what to do, but kind of working over a 6 month to 18-month time of, like, very much working with the team and having the ideas to come up from them, and potentially, I think, is coming back to, like, the idea of evaluation. I think team coaching, it can kind of help the team, evaluate itself, and I think that could be a very interesting a way to have a team reflect and think about whether it's succeeding, and defining what success means for them, for the group itself, and it provides some observation, and it's that group reflection thing. Knowing if integration is working, I think the way to measure that is by connecting with the team and asking them themselves. So it's maybe it is a research study, or it is coaching. So there's just a couple coaching team resources that I'll share out. I'm going to stop here, stop sharing, and go to questions. I think sorry, I hope that wasn't too long, but that's what I'm thinking about. Sorry, in a way of for trying to bring it back to, like, how do we know if it's working? And again, I think, like, we know that it's working when we can see it in practice in teams, and be able to learn from them. So thanks. If there's questions, I've got my screen up too.
Well, thank you, Dr. Cuddy. You're welcome to put questions or comments into the chat, or also, Bethany is modeling this. Raise your hand, and you can ask them out loud. Go ahead, Bethany.
Great. Yeah. I'm going to start right back at the beginning, Colleen, where you were noting that collaboration in your mind is not the same as integration. And maybe you've run into people who confuse those two things often. I'm just wondering, how did any of your participants, any of your respondents, kind of have a hard time knowing what you were asking for? When you asked them to recount failed or successful integration, how did you help them grasp, integration versus collaboration, or how have you talked about that out, in your sphere generally?
Mm-hmm. I think for my research, I tried to get them focused on by sending them like, like very repetitive, like talking about integration when I was recruiting, talking with the PI when I was recruiting team, sending out the questions in advance, including that definition of integration. Again, keep bringing it back to what integration was in my mind. And then I think after, and then, I think there's probably 4 or 5 times where they've actually had that definition. I explained and asked if they understood, and they were yes. And at that point, I was like, okay, well, now everything that they're telling me, they're considering it integration at that point. I didn't kind of go back or question and say, oh, that sounds more like this to me, because at that point, they were educated enough, I think, and they were coming from a place of what they thought integration was and how it looked for them, and they were in that way the most reliable source, I think.
Yeah. Can you give us an example of something that might be in your mind, like collaboration, but not integration?
Sure. I'm just trying to think even. So I think a group can come together and collaborate on a process. Yeah, or kind of, I'm trying to think of a good, let me think of a good, I'm trying to think if I can grab one from even from the science team that I'm working with. So I think, maybe, okay, but maybe even like we get people together to collaborate and kind of help each other. So they kind of bring their perspective, right, and or their ideas to a group and and work together, and but they're all kind of keeping like their piece a little separate in a way, like it's coming in, but it's not owned by the group in the end. I think maybe that's where I'm going to. So when it's integrated, the people are coming in, they're bringing their ideas together, they're collaborating towards a goal, but then something is happening, right? It's like the sausage making is happening. Something comes out of that that's separate from the integration. So a new way of doing things. So, for example, like the team collaborated on an approach to testing blood, basically for an arbovirus, and everyone kind of collaborated on what the process would be, and that was fine. And they developed a new process, but it wasn't fully integrated because until they had the perspectives of everyone and recognize what some of the flaws in the process, that they weren't fully understanding the science behind it, because they kind of collaborated, and then they were taking blood samples and then making an assumption, because they had developed this process based on that the virus was, that people had a virus based on some readings that they were taking, like for that, but the clinical piece wasn't there. And when they actually understood the concept of the clinical piece and integrated that into their process, they actually got something new, something that was different. So I don't know, is that too complex? Yeah, I think collaboration gets you down the road, but doesn't make the final deal happen, I guess.
I just wanted to elevate Steve's comments in the chat about multidisciplinary science. That's where my mind went with Bethany's question just now. But it's like going to something definitional, right? Which
Yeah,
the way I think about multidisciplinarity is that there's sort of a sequential aspect to it, where it's sort of like, oh, I'm handing you this data, I'm handing you this, and there isn't an integration of the ideas and concepts across those they could be disciplinary boundaries, but there's other boundaries I think that get spanned there. But I think, yeah, I'm going to like a definitional.
I think it's easy to do that. And I think of that continuum too, where like, you've got like monodisciplinary, multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, and like this kind of continuum. And I'm very much thinking about interdisciplinarity, and maybe in a multidisciplinary team, collaboration is enough, maybe, for what the goal they're trying to achieve is. I don't know, but I think like when you're talking about interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, to go back to those, you really need that integration to get something new.
Well, thank you, Caroline.
Hey, thanks. I was really struck by what you said, Colleen, about the importance of social integration as really being foundational to all aspects of integration as you defined it, but that really being the crux, getting to know humans as humans. And when you talk about being in proximity and spending time together and getting to know one another, it felt to me like, wow, there really has to be an upper boundary then to team size. Like there has to be a limit to the number of people you can get to know well on your team. And I thought about, then you brought up later on in the presentation, like scaling up from there. So thinking about super groups, teams of teams, and all of a sudden integration in those contexts looks really prohibitive, if only for like the time investment, the human investment in other people. And so then I wondered, like, well, is integration a thing that has to be happening amongst all team members at all times? Or is it enough to have integration in critical moments, in critical spaces, around critical problems? Like, can integration go up and down over time? That's a very rambling question, but I'd just love to hear anything you have to say in that general
I think
space.
so. I think, it's something that I've been thinking about too, is seeing those ebbs and flows of integration, right? And I do think, yeah, it's not scalable. Like there's going, what is this? What is the kind of sweet spot for the number of people that can successfully integrate? And yeah, no, there definitely are there. It's almost like it'd be interesting to kind of like map on a project, examples of integration when they happen. And again, looking at other antecedents of what was happening at that time that enabled them, like how many people were involved. Like I can kind of go back to some of the data and do that. It would be interesting. But yes, I think there's definitely times when integration is possible. And, we're all sometimes like, I don't know, I'm a leader too, right? And like sometimes you just have to be like, okay, like it's go, right? Like it's like we've done it. It there's so many things to balance. Like it's definitely something to strive for, but it doesn't need to, there's when is it critical? I agree. Like I think like that's like more research needs to be done. Like when is it is critical, we need to build on it. I think even small steps we can do, maybe, keeping we always say too, in team science, like keep this team as small as possible, but then we build these huge teams, right? So it's like these subgroups. But then, I don't know if you have representation from the subgroups integrating. I don't know. It's like a lot. I hear what you're saying, and it's something I've been thinking about, but I haven't done the research on. And there's probably someone on the call that might be able to talk better. I'm
also
looking at like
thinking about some like temporal phases of teamwork, right? And like what needs to happen in like development phases versus execution phases, and like what kinds of integration that may be
are
another
most
topic.
important at
Kinds
the
of
different
integration
temporal.
need to happen in both of those different phases, and
I
yeah.
think that's really where
question.
we need to go to be thinking about, like what types of integration happens in those different temporal phases of teams building, and almost like the norming, storming, forming, like where are we in those, and when is integration most important, and when do we maybe need to focus on some of these other processes? Because there certainly are. I think like Steve put in there, you can certainly have collaboration with integration, but can you have integration without collaboration? probably not. Like, I think, you do need to collaborate to some extent before you can integrate. You do have to have some sense of a process of psychological safety within a team before you can successfully integrate. They're all kind of co-joined. None of them exist in isolation, as I said. Jeremy, I think, has a question too. I don't know if someone else did before.
Yeah, just on this idea of networks of teams and teams of teams. Project management framework has this scaled agile framework idea, which is basically takes agile teams of like 5 to 8 people, but scales it across a huge like IT projects. And I don't know very much about this, but it really relies on like top-down program management to integrate across all of the teams. But it takes sort of like a hierarchical view of basically integrating across the entire project. It's not really very relevant to academic or like federally funded science centers like we mostly probably care about, but there are folks that think about this kind of thing.
And maybe we should be thinking about it more too. I think like the project manager roles are really important in teams, and yeah, there's lots of research that we can be bringing into the way that we support team science.
We are at the hour, and thank you everyone for the questions and the engaging discussion. And as usual, we will post the video to this webinar and discussion on our website, interreach.org, in our webinars archive. So please keep an eye out for that in the next week or two. And hope to see everyone again next month. Again, keep an eye out in your email for the announcement for what will be happening in the month of March. And then I know in April, we have a really cool panel that's shaping up. So you can go to our website and see more information on that as it comes in. So thank you very much to our speaker today, Colleen Cuddy. We really appreciate you coming and sharing your perspective on this. And Dr. Cuddy, if you are up for sharing your email in the chat in case anyone wants to reach out, I welcome you to do that. If not, you can hunt it down online and
No, I'm happy to do that, and I'm happy to give you my slides as well. And I just saved the chat because there's some really interesting comments, so I'm happy to follow up with any of that as well. So thank you for everyone for engaging and helping me think about it more. There's a long way to go in thinking about this, and I appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much. And thanks to everyone. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you again next month.
Thanks, bye.
Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you, everyone.